Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our coverage of the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And we continue to see headlines out of the region that would indicate things are not pleasant between the two opposing forces, meaning Ukraine and Russia. So I'll go through some of the mainstream and not so mainstream media news headlines. So first, the Atlantic, the reason Putin would risk war. Sky News: Russia plans for Ukraine ruined after U.S. and Britain call out possible invasion. That's Sky News. Interesting. Let's see here. RT: Washington gets grilled over Russia false flag claims. The Jamestown Foundation: Kremlin must make final decisions on war soon as diplomatic runway grows short. Mail Online: Russia is massing nuclear-capable missiles in Belarus, NATO warns. So that's just a headline grabber. I mean, that's really kind of a ridiculous statement. Obviously, they could move nuclear assets into Belarus, and they really wouldn't need, meaning the Russians, really wouldn't need to do that. There are nuclear capable assets. If the Russians chose to utilize nuclear weapons, that wouldn't necessarily need to be moved into Belarus. Now, I think what they're referring to is the prospect of the possible use of Iskander battlefield tactical missiles that could be tipped with tactical nuclear warheads. But again, there are many ways to deploy nuclear weapons by the Russians, and that's just a small piece of that ability. So again, I think it's kind of irrelevant. We also continue to see Russian forces building up in Belarus. We're looking at an estimated 30,000 personnel in Belarus by around February 10th to February 20th. And that would be a fairly significant force. Again, all of that is not necessarily combat personnel, but support personnel, electronic warfare personnel. We're also looking at assets with the Russian Air Force that are in Belarus, so I think they're including some of that as well. But we do hear about these units that are obviously Russian. VDV units, the Russian airborne forces, are now moving in. And we hear about, so for instance, we hear the 76th Air Assault Division is moving into Belarus. Now, when they say that, what they mean is a battalion tactical group or multiple battalion tactical groups, which are essentially elements of the 76th Air Assault Division. So, for instance, if we look at these airborne regiments, so you have the 234th Air Assault Regiment, which contains 2 air assault battalions, 1 airborne battalion, 1 recon battalion, 1 self-propelled artillery battalion. They'll usually create a battalion tactical group out of elements of this force. So maybe they'll take an air assault battalion, and a lot of times these units can also be deployed when we're referring to the VDV or airborne forces on the ground in infantry fighting vehicles. So you'll take a battalion and they'll reinforce it with some self-propelled artillery. Maybe they even pull a tank company from this independent tank battalion that operates with the 76, and that will become your battalion tactical group, usually numbered between 800 and 1,000 personnel. They'll do the same with their motorized rifle forces as well. So most of these motorized rifle brigades, mechanized brigades, contain 3 mechanized battalion and a tank battalion. So what they'll generally do is take a mechanized battalion in the case of a mechanized brigade, and they'll attach a tank company to that battalion. And they'll also attach quite possibly a battery of artillery and some air defense assets and maybe some reconnaissance assets as well. And that becomes your 800 to 1,000 man, 1,000 personnel battalion tactical group. So again, everything is being measured right now in battalion tactical groups that are being maneuvered around Ukraine at this point. We're also hearing the Ukrainians talk about that they don't believe the force posture is large enough for the Russians to invade Ukraine. And I think that's a mistake. I think in terms of occupation, yes, but Russia would not need to do a full-on deployment of total force construct in order to launch an invasion of Ukraine. They could do a cold start or a lukewarm start, as I like to call it. And again, I think that's Ukraine looking at and fighting some of the last wars in history. I think the general staff in Ukraine is quite possibly looking at the American deployments in 2003 and even 1991 in Iraq and how that was executed. They're also probably looking at World War II and elements of that was fought in much of Ukraine. So again, with that being said, I think the next conflict quite possibly is going to look a lot different. You're going to see a lot of electronic warfare assets. The Russians have been building up their drone capacity, not so much as a strike, a drone strike capacity, but more of a surveillance capacity that has the ability to what we call sense and shoot, meaning the drone can identify the target, and another asset of another Russian asset would come in and either drop bombs or fire cruise missiles or what have you. But the Russians really like to use those drones in conjunction with battlefield artillery. So a drone will fly over a target area, give real-time tactical input to a rocket battery or a self-propelled artillery battery, and launch a set attack almost with real-time live footage, so they can actually adjust fire if need be. So again, I don't think the Ukrainians, if they're thinking that Russians are going to have to amass this 250,000 personnel force to invade Ukraine, I think they're mistaken on that. I do think that the idea of a Ukrainian mobilization and a very, very hard fought fight is what is keeping Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine at this point. I think the mobilization that is occurring inside of Ukraine is part of the issue that's keeping him right now second guessing on whether he should pull the trigger or not. But again, this whole idea that we have to wait for frozen ground or we have to wait for these additional assets to move in. I don't think that's the case. I think that Russians, if they wanted to, they would start this with the use of air power, attack helicopters, strike aircraft, drones, cruise missiles. Those are the sort of systems that we would initially see on the battlefield in this conflict. I mean, if the Russians are smart, that's what they're going to do. They're gonna use their capability as to their advantage, and they're probably not going to launch a headlong offensive into the Ukraine without at least softening up some of the Ukrainian air defense networks, and where the Russians can have a fairly undisturbed uh, 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 air assets over the Ukraine. So again, we keep hearing blitzkrieg and lightning war. That's the same. But again, I think initially, if the Russians are going to do this, and again, if that's a big if, we're first going to see airstrikes. And if we don't see that, if we don't see all these cruise missile strikes in and around Kiev and other places around the Ukraine, then it could be quite possibly they're looking to contain the conflict just to a very localized area, which could be the far eastern Ukraine, and just the areas involved with the separatist activities. So again, that's something that we're going to have to watch very, very closely as well. But again, we keep seeing the buildup of these forces now, especially in Belarus, and it would appear that, again, February 10th to the 20th, and in all likelihood would be the day that the Russians may jump on this right after the Winter Olympics, or even sooner. It's very, very hard to say. Or, again, 50-50. nothing happens at all. The Russians, worst case scenario, walk away, and they have achieved the de facto occupation with significant military capacity in Belarus, and they could keep that military capacity there if they wanted to, uh, because of this articulated threat that they perceive in NATO and the West, and that would be a kind of a win for Vladimir Putin. But again, given the scope and the size of this buildup, again, it probably, it would not surprise me at all if the Russians moved. And just given the size and the scope of all these forces that are being deployed from other parts of the Russian Federation, indicate, something may in fact happen. But again, just going back to that force deployment, when they say that, for instance, the 90th Tank Division of the Russian Federation is deploying to Belarus, or I'm sorry, the Ukrainian border, usually, again, in the context of what we're seeing right now, it's not the entire 90th Tank Division. It is elements of that tank division that is deploying in the form of these battalion tactical groups. So they could be doing something where they have the ability to rotate these battalion tactical groups as well. Unsure if that's actually happening, but it is possible. So, example is here's the 90th Tank Division, and again, we know that they've talked about this unit being deployed uh, at least near Smolensk, and again, it sounds like they've probably sent a reinforced battalion tactical group from each of its regiments, and I've just highlighted all the regiments, and then they have a motorized rifle regiment as well. But it sounds like they moved elements of each of their tank regiments. Again, centered on in the case of a tank division's tank regiment, usually a tank battalion and a tank regiment, you have three tank battalions, each one numbering about 31 tanks. So about 93 tanks in each one of these tank regiments. The count for a motorized rifle regiment or a motorized rifle brigade, the tank battalion attached within that is a little bit different. They usually have 40 tanks in its tank battalion and then 3 additional mechanized infantry battalion. But that's kind of what we're seeing right now, and we're going to continue to watch and report and develop and put out more content. And hope everyone has a great evening. Have a good day.